Create a YouTube video using this script. Here's a quick overview of what we'll cover. Table of contents, Part 1. Introduction, about 3 sections. Section 1. The road not taken. Imagine a different America. Schools remain segregated. This is a parallel world. One where the landmark case, Brown vs. Board of Education, never happened. The Supreme Court's decision in 1954 changed history, but in this alternate reality, that turning point never came. The ramifications touch every aspect of American life. Section 2. Separate and unequal. A nation divided. Segregation casts a long shadow. It divides communities and perpetuates inequality. In this alternate America, schools are emblems of this division. Black and white students learn in separate worlds. Their opportunities are unequal from the start. Black schools are underfunded and under-resourced. White schools enjoy better facilities and more opportunities. Section 3. The dream deferred. The American dream, the idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work. But for Black Americans in this alternate reality, the dream is deferred. Segregation creates insurmountable obstacles. The civil rights movement faces even greater challenges. The dream of a just and equitable society seems further out of reach. The classrooms tell the story most starkly. In segregated America, black schools are often overcrowded, housed in dilapidated buildings. Textbooks, if they exist, are often hand-me-downs from white schools. Teachers, though dedicated, are stretched thin. The curriculum itself reflects the ingrained inequality. Black students are often taught a Eurocentric history. This unequal education system creates a vicious cycle. The American dream remains perpetually out of reach. Within the hearts and minds of Black Americans, a seed of resentment grows. The injustice of segregation becomes a constant source of anger. They see their white peers enjoying better opportunities. Some turn to activism, demanding change through peaceful protests. Others embrace more radical ideologies. The Black community becomes increasingly fractured. As the 1960s dawn, a new generation comes of age. These young Black Americans are less willing to accept the status quo. They have seen the struggle of their parents and grandparents. They draw inspiration from the civil rights movement. They also look beyond America's borders to independence movements in Africa and Asia. This new generation is bolder, more impatient. They are not afraid to challenge authority. A new era of activism is born. The economic consequences of segregated education are stark. Black Americans find themselves trapped in a cycle of poverty. The doors to higher education remain largely closed. Black workers are overrepresented in low-wage jobs. The unemployment rate in Black communities soars. The American dream fades into a distant promise. The barriers to economic advancement for Black Americans are deliberate. Discriminatory practices in hiring, housing, and lending create obstacles. Black applicants are often passed over for jobs. They are denied loans and mortgages. This systemic racism ensures that the majority remain trapped in poverty. The human cost of this economic inequality is immeasurable. Generations of Black Americans are denied the opportunity to reach their full potential. The cycle of poverty and despair takes a heavy toll. The lack of economic opportunity fuels a sense of hopelessness. It contributes to social problems such as crime and drug abuse. The failure to address this inequality has profound consequences. The American dream remains unfulfilled. The issue of segregated schools becomes a lightning rod in American politics. The nation finds itself increasingly polarized over racial equality. The South, fiercely resistant to integration, digs in its heels. Segregationist politicians rise to power on promises of maintaining the Southern way of life. The North, though more sympathetic, is not without its own divisions. This political polarization paralyzes the nation. The federal government struggles to assert its authority. The Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus Board of Education proves difficult to enforce. President after president grapples with the issue of segregation. The South threatens secession once more. The American experiment teeters on the brink. The federal government's failure to address segregation has profound consequences. America's struggle with segregation does not go unnoticed on the world stage. The Soviet Union seizes on the issue as evidence of American hypocrisy. Newly independent nations in Africa and Asia are disillusioned. America's moral authority on the world stage is diminished. The struggle for civil rights in America becomes an international issue. The world watches, waiting to see if America will rise to the challenge. In the alternate 1960s, a profound cultural consequence of segregation takes root. The very soul of America is stifled by the continued separation of black and white communities. The absence of integrated schools means the organic exchange of ideas is absent. Black culture remains largely invisible to white America. This cultural segregation runs both ways. The result is a cultural chasm that hinders empathy and understanding. Music becomes a stark illustration of cultural segregation. While rock and roll sweeps across white America, black artists develop their own unique sounds. Motown flourishes in black communities. Jazz continues to evolve. These musical revolutions often occur in parallel universes. The potential for music to bridge divides is tragically unrealized. The cultural impact of segregated schools extends far beyond music. Literature, art, theatre, dance, all forms of creative expression are impacted. Black writers create powerful works that challenge the status quo. Yet their voices often struggle to be heard beyond segregated audiences. White Americans remain oblivious to the realities of black life. This cultural divide hinders the development of a shared national identity. The continued existence of segregated schools in this alternate timeline fundamentally alters the trajectory of the civil rights movement. The dream of integration, once a unifying goal, loses some of its potency as black communities grapple with the reality that separate can never be equal.
The focus shifts from demanding access to white institutions to demanding control over their own. The concept of black power gains traction, advocating for self-determination, economic empowerment, and a rejection of the white-dominated power structures that perpetuate inequality.
Leaders like Malcolm X, with his message of black pride and self-reliance, find a more receptive audience in this environment. The Black Panther Party, with its focus on armed self-defense and community empowerment, emerges as a powerful force challenging police brutality and advocating for social justice.
This shift towards more radical ideologies creates tension within the civil rights movement itself. The non-violent resistance championed by Martin Luther King Jr. is increasingly seen as insufficient by some who believe that more forceful tactics are necessary to achieve true liberation.
The fight for civil rights in this alternate America becomes increasingly costly. Peaceful protests are met with violent resistance from white supremacist groups and often from law enforcement itself.
The images of brutality against black demonstrators, broadcast into homes across the nation, shock the conscience of some but harden the resolve of others. The assassinations of civil rights leaders, a tragic reality in our own timeline, become even more frequent and brazen in this alternate reality.
Each loss is a devastating blow to the movement, silencing powerful voices and leaving a void that is difficult to fill. Yet despite the dangers and setbacks, the fight for equality continues. Black communities, steeled by generations of oppression, refuse to be silenced.
They understand that freedom is not a gift to be bestowed, but a right to be claimed, and they are willing to pay the price, whatever it may be. In courtrooms and on the streets, in classrooms and in voting booths. The struggle for civil rights becomes a defining battle for the soul of America.
The outcome of this struggle will determine whether the nation lives up to its ideals or remains forever bound by the chains of its past. As the decade wears on, the social fabric of America strains under the weight of its unresolved racial tensions. The nation finds itself on edge, teetering between hope and despair, progress and backlash.
The urban unrest that marked the late 1960s in our own timeline erupts with even greater ferocity in this alternate reality. Cities across America become battlegrounds as Black communities, frustrated by the slow pace of change and the persistent inequality, rise up in protest.
The government's response is often heavy-handed, further inflaming tensions. The militarization of police forces, a trend already underway in our own timeline, accelerates in this alternate reality, creating a climate of fear and repression in Black communities. The dream of a just and equitable society, once a beacon of hope, feels increasingly distant. America, deeply divided and grappling with its inner demons, seems to be losing its way. The promise of its founding ideals, tarnished by the legacy of segregation, hangs in the balance. The story of America is, in many ways, a story of dreams. The dream of freedom, of opportunity, of a better life for oneself and one's children. But in this alternate timeline, where the scourge of segregation continues to poison the nation's soul, the American dream becomes a fractured, elusive promise, particularly for Black Americans. The ideal of a meritocratic society where hard work and determination pave the path to success rings hollow in a world where opportunities are systematically denied based on the color of one's skin. The disparities in education, in economic mobility, in access to healthcare and housing all point to a stark reality. The American dream, while attainable for some, remains a distant aspiration for far too many. This realization breeds a deep sense of disillusionment, a gnawing awareness that the promise of America is not extended equally to all its citizens. The belief in a fair and just society, a cornerstone of the American identity, is shaken to its core. And as the years turn into decades, the consequences of this fractured dream reverberate through every facet of American life. The legacy of segregation in this alternate timeline is a legacy of loss. It is a loss of human potential, as generations of Black children are denied the opportunity to fully develop their talents and contribute to society. It is a loss of economic prosperity, as the nation fails to harness the creativity and ingenuity of all its citizens.
It is a loss of social cohesion, as mistrust and animosity fester between communities divided by race and opportunity. The fabric of American society, already strained by economic inequality and political polarization, is further weakened by the enduring legacy of segregation.
This loss is not confined to the Black community. White Americans too bear the weight of this legacy. They are deprived of the richness and vibrancy that diversity brings. They are denied the opportunity to learn from and grow alongside those who have different experiences and perspectives. The failure to dismantle the structures of segregation leaves an indelible stain on the American conscience, a constant reminder of the gap between its ideals and its reality. The alternate history of a segregated America stands as a stark warning, a reminder of the fragility of progress and the ever-present threat of regression. It highlights the importance of constant vigilance in safeguarding civil rights and the need for unwavering commitment to the pursuit of justice and equality for all.
While this imagined timeline diverged from our own with the non-existence of Brown v. Board of Education, the fight for social justice continues. It is a fight that transcends generations, a relay race against injustice where the baton is passed from one generation to the next.
The struggle for a more just and equitable society is an ongoing process, one that demands constant introspection, education, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. It is a reminder that the arc of the moral universe, while long, does not bend towards justice automatically. It requires the active participation of those who believe in a better future, a future where the dream of America is finally realized by all.